Hi guys, welcome to part 5 of the Track and Knife Game Asset tutorial series. This is the last part and I'll be covering the texturing process. So let's jump right in. So the first thing I want to do is make a little light setup in Max, just using Omni lights dotted around. And this is going to serve to be a lighting bake, which I can use in the texturing process to add a little bit of baked specular, baked shadow, and fill in all of my crevices and just add a little bit of detail that I would have had to paint manually in Photoshop, so it saves a bit of time. So that's looking pretty good. I'm going to do a render to texture to get this bake out, so that's why I've got my high poly and my low poly in there, and I've selected the low poly and added a render to texture by pressing 0 on the keys and then adding a projection modifier. I've added in the high poly, so it's going to bake the detail from that high poly lighting and the high poly normal map and all that. It'll bake that down onto the low poly. It's the same as what we did in X normal, but I'm just doing it for lighting purposes here. So I'm going back into Photoshop now, and one of the maps that I got from render to texture was a material ID map, which I got by just changing the material ID of each of the high poly objects to be a block color. And then I've used that as the base for my Photoshop file. So instantly I've got the outline, or the colored in outline of each of my surfaces. So that makes selecting them in Photoshop very easy, just with the Magic Wand tool. I can select each different type of material from that map. And then I'm overlaying the lighting on top of that. I really like to be organized with my layers. I'll color code everything, I'll name everything correctly, and I'll put everything into a group of what it's meant to be. I like working all my maps in one file. I find that I can swap around maps pretty easy that way. When I'm creating like the specular map, I can pull some things from the diffuse and just bring that up. I don't have to go into multiple files. And as soon as when you want to change anything, when you've got a map for the Photoshop file for every single map, it becomes a right pain to drag and drop things from one to the other. Whereas with the way that I do it, the specular is literally an adjustment on the diffuse. So anything that does get updated on the diffuse will be in the specular. So I'm adding some detail into the ambient occlusion bake, which we got from X normal, and I'm deleting some of the detail around areas like this this ring of metal, because that'll be shadowed in Marmoset or in Engine, and I don't want it to be baked dark. I want it to be a metallic surface, so I'm removing that from the AO bake. See, I've overlaid my wireframe just the same way as we did in the last step where we rendered out a UVW template. I've desaturated that and put it on top, just named it W. I've inverted it and set it to screen mode, and then that overlays the wire, and I can adjust the opacity to suit. So let's start painting. I'm going to start blocking out the base of the knife where the cutting edge is. So I'm just using the lasso tool to select that edge nice and sharp. And I'm going to color that in above the color map with a lighter color, because if you look at the references, it's a lighter metallic surface, either because it's completely worn from being used, or because it hasn't been coated with this rough black coating. While we're doing that, I'm going to create the black coating as well. So I've selected every area that's on the knife blade, and I've applied on a new layer. I've applied a 50% grey fill to the whole object, and then I've added a very strong noise, and I've blurred it quite substantially. So this is going to serve to be the bumpy surface of the knife blade. Then adjusting that to multiply, and then adding a little bit of transparency to it, so it's not quite so strong. So now I want to start creating the logo to go on the knife. So I know where it is on the map, and I can start painting that. So for the logo, there's no secret to how I did it. I don't really like to just get a logo from Google and stick it right on top. I like to recreate it. So using a mixture of the line tool and the pen tool, I've recreated the logo from scratch. I'm just adding in some of the details and cleaning it up now. This way I can resize it to any size I need, I can use it as a mask, and I don't have to rely on getting the exact logo, because I don't think you can even find this one on Google. It's just the way that they stamped it on the knife, the manufacturer's mark. So I'm placing that there, and I'm just adjusting the color to fit. It's not quite a fully dark black logo. It's quite worn. It's a stamp, so it's just lightly colored, the difference. So I'm scaling those down, and I'm going to use the warp tool to warp that text using the arc setting and scale it down a little bit, and that'll be placed nicely on the screw. Now the reason I'm adding these things in now is because they are the base colors of the knife. So they're all things that I want on the bottom of my diffuse layers, and then on top of that I can add all things like scratches and wear and tear and coloration. Okay, so with that added in there, I'm adding a little bevel to it just to give it a little bit of depth. Even though most of the indents and extrusions come from the normal map, I still like to add a small little bevel in there now and again, or a drop shadow, just to add a little bit more depth, because in some cases, and with not quite so advanced shaders, if your knife goes into a shadowed area, you don't actually see the normal map in specular at all. So you want to still be able to read that form, and in reality, if you take a knife into a shadowed area, there's still going to be some specularity, some lighting that's bouncing off it and letting you see that surface. But in a game, it's just not up to that level yet, so we're not going to be able to see the normal map detail. I'm duplicating that over to the other screws and rotating it slightly, give it a bit of variation. So I'm turning on a few shape dynamics, texture, dual brush, and transfer to opacity to pen pressure. So I've got this nice sort of very rough, chalky brush, which is great for painting these little wear and tear details, which are going to appear on the top of the screw. These things look really nice in game, but you can go overboard with them. So I always try and go a little bit higher than I want to, a little bit more, and then drop things back. Just go back and delete a few of these things and drop the opacity of the layer down a little bit. I'm doing it in two stages. One is sort of a rough, like a rough covering of wear, and then I go in with a sharper, more opaque brush and a smaller brush and do the little details around the edging. Moving on to screw by screw, just doing one by one, because I don't want all these to be the same. There's the reason that the UV map, we're not tiling these and sharing detail, so there's no point in duplicating and using it on every screw, wasting the texture space that we have. Just doing one by one, trying to come up with some interesting and believable detail. Something that I'm doing too is masking the text off. So I've just control clicked on the layer with the text on it, and that's another reason I kept that on a separate layer, so I could do this. Control click that, and then everywhere that I paint won't apply to where the text is. Just almost done with that now. Nothing happening here that I need to talk over really. It's simply the same process over and over again. I'm doing a little bit now on the edging of the metallic ring, because this would get a little bit of wear and tear from where the rope's being pulled around in and out of it. I doubt you'd undo the screws too much, but they will get rubbed on things, on branches and up against your belt and all different areas. So I'm edging around those on the handle as well, but I'm trying to remember that this isn't metal. This is like a linen cloth handle, so wrapped on wood, so it's not going to have quite as sharp highlights. So I'm sort of, when I'm adding these in, I'm adding a little bit sharp, and then I'm blurring it slightly and smudging it so it doesn't look quite as sharp as the metal surface. Already these are looking quite good on their own as good diffuse bakes, good diffuse textures, but there's still a lot to go, still a lot of texture work to come. I think that's done, so I'm going to edge the handle now as well, just give it a little bit of light wear and tear. I'm using a very scattered chalky brush to paint in all of these highlighted areas. These are all raised sections or corner edges, so I like to highlight them in the diffuse slightly. Again, you don't want to go overboard with these things, there's just a rough scratchy edging that will blur a little bit as well, and just create something that picks out the form of the object when you're looking at it from different angles and different lighting situations. And here's the fun bit I was looking forward to, painting all the dirt and scratches on the metal. Trying to remember that this is like a layered surface coating that looks, this is almost like a non-stick coating on a pan, but it's got that rough coating. So in areas where it's worn, it's going to have that coating worn away, so it's going to look a lot cleaner, a lot smoother, and we're going to have to apply that in the normal maps as well, in the spec maps. So just edging in the surfaces with the chalky brush. Every now and again I'm switching to a smaller brush and to do the fine edging. I like to flip around the top of my knife, which is the left side, and then the right side. I like to go back and forward so I don't get overwhelmed with one section of detail. So I like to sort of work in harmony between all areas of my UV map. So if you could take a snapshot at my texturing phase all the way through, and the whole map would be built up in time, rather than concentrating on rendering one area at once. I find that's a lot better, because then if you change something or change some dramatic feature, yeah, you can adjust to that on the fly, rather than having to redo all the painted detail. That's just wasted time. So I'm going to try now and create the pattern on the handle. It's sort of like a wavy, weird, distorted pattern that it's sort of going to be hard. It would be hard to paint manually. It would be very hard to find a texture that I could just slot on. So I'm going to have to create this manually using a mixture of different tools. So I spent a little bit of time thinking about the best way to approach this first. And I figured the best way would be to create what would be like scan lines, just little lines that duplicated, and then go into the liquify tool and start pulling these around and putting them into the right shapes. With the liquify tool, I can really control how many edges are getting distorted, because you'll notice in some of the references, it's almost like you've got 2 or 3 or 4 big lines that come close to the screws, and then it just devolves into multiple lines, so you can't really count how many there are, and then it blends in with the handle. So I'll just speed that up a little bit while I complete this process, because it was quite the time-consuming one. I think the texturing was the most difficult and slowest part of this project, especially this area, but this is something that I really wanted to get right, because it added some sort of unique detail to the mesh, to the model, and made it stand out a little bit, rather than having a default texture or a uniform looking linen material instead. So I'm just working on the one side for now, and now I'm back into the texture. I'm going to duplicate that and flip it vertically, and I'm going to go back into the liquify tool after placing it roughly, and I'm going to start working on the top section, which needs to be adjusted to fit the bottom section. I'm going to roughly match up all the points because I'll go back into the diffuse soon and paint all the connections. I think it's looking pretty good so far. So now I'm erasing some of the sections and I'm going to start cleaning it up, matching it up with the bottom to the top. Yeah, repainting those connections. And stretching some of this out in Liquify again, just to get the kind of feel I want to this distorted pattern. I'm looking at reference quite often while I do this, because it's something I want to get right from the reference, but it's something that you think you understand immediately when you look at it, but then when you try and recreate it, you realize it's quite a complicated pattern, and how it distorts is quite unique. And also I want to get away from people assuming that it's a problem with my UVs, because that would happen. Okay, so I've used my base color layer to select just the handle now. So I'm just getting a little swatch from my reference so I can make sure that I match this up really accurately. Again, I'm selecting the base color and just using a refine mask to smooth that selection slightly so I don't get quite such a hard edge around it, which will stand out. And I'm overlaying that distortion pattern now. I'm also creating a linen texture here, just using the texturize from Photoshop, and then creating a new texture, creating it into a pattern by selecting it all, going to edit, make pattern, and then I'm going to set it to overlay mode, reduce the opacity slightly, and tint it blue. Now that blue tint that's looking quite realistic now. It's quite close to the reference image. The distortion pattern looks really good. Very happy with it, and it's matching up well and blending in with the design. It's not standing out too much, and it looks quite organic, which is after all, that's the aim. So I'm adding a bit of an emboss to the Topps logo now, just to give it a little bit of depth. And I'm also playing with the opacity settings to try and get it to sit realistically, and adjusting the color settings as well to match up. This isn't a design project, it's not something we're making up from scratch. The idea is to get it as close as possible to the reference, so having reference images up all the time is definitely something I'd recommend. So just resizing things a little bit, playing with the layers. I've hidden a few to start working on the next section. So I've selected the border by clicking on my color base for the handle, which is on a separate layer. And then I'm doing a red stroke on top of that with a bit of opacity. And I've saved that off as a diffuse now, and loaded that up into Marmoset just to check whether things are balanced, things are looking good, and that red line's appeared exactly where I want it to. It outlines the blade that sits in the middle, so I think that's looking good. We can move on. Adding a little bevel to the screw holes, bringing them up from black, just to add a little more depth to them. Now I'm checking with and without my lighting bake on and off now to see how things are looking. I'm playing with the balance of the level opacities, all the opacity settings for the layers, trying to get something that looks realistic. And then I think we're going to go on to continue to working on all of our dirt. So back to my dirt layer, my wear for the blade. I'm using the chalk brush again to plot in some different types of dirt and grime and wear, and then I'm using the standard smudge brush with a chalk brush setting, and just smudging that all into place, because that's essentially the way that the metal is going to be worn. It's not going to be big blocks of wear. It's going to be stretched out and smudged wear over time, because of the way that the metal is going to be worn in different places all the time. It's never going to be uniform. So just smoothing that out. Adding in a little bits of dirt here and there, and then switching to the smudge tool and smudging them in, trying to get something that looks more realistic and organic. Smudging them all out into the middle as well now, sort of. So you can imagine if the guy who was holding this knife had sort of rubbed it up against a tree or his cloth to clean it, all the dirt and grime would stretch down the length of the blade. So the whole time I'm doing this, I'm trying to think about how the knife would be used and what kind of wear that it would take. Doing the same to the top, all the tops of the serrated edges and the top of the blade, the cutting sections. Now, I'm not expert on survival and tactical knives, but I do have a couple of good friends who are, and they gave me a bit of advice during the project. So it's always good to do your research, find out how these knives would be used, what kind of wear that they would take, and in what situations they would be used. So maybe they would be wet or dirty, or maybe they wouldn't get dirty at all because of the way that they're only used in a shop or something like that. Obviously this one is a tactical knife for outdoor use. Okay, I'm creating the logo now for the side of the knife blade. I'm using the pen tool here, just standard Photoshop pen tool, creating points and moving them around using the stroking option to just black at the moment with a quite a thick pen and no fill. And now I've changed that over, so now there's no stroke but there's fill, and I'm outlining this this graphic, because if you're looking online for some of these logos, they're not going to be the ones that are stamped or painted onto the materials. They're going to be a little bit more designed, a little bit more ones that are used for graphics rather than for the stamps or the manufacturer's logos that they put on stuff. I'm using negative space as well now. So if you look at what I'm doing up at the top of the pen tool window, you can, when you create a new shape, you can have it subtract from the previous path. So I can remove all of these little sections. I find the pen tools a really good tool for doing these types of things. There's no need for me to go into, like, let's say Illustrator and recreate this logo with massive accuracy. This is plenty enough detail, especially because if I'm getting the form of all of this roughly correct, well, the texture is going to be sized down. It's going to be in a game. It's going to be, it's not going to be high res, up close Illustrator type graphic that it's going to be vectorized. It's you do things for their uses, not to just get all anal about it and make everything dead on perfect. You obviously try to get a good result, but you need to be efficient on the time as well that it's going to take you. Just using a circle with a stroke on it now. And once that's done and pretty good, I'll save that off as a separate texture, and I can bring that in and use it on the knife blade. So I'm putting it on there on the blade section now, and I'm just going to colorize it with get the correct color. Again, I've got reference images up on my other screen, having a look at what this looks like, what color it is, how it's stamped on. Is it embossed? Is it just painted, or is it a transfer? All these things tell me how it's going to affect the weapon. Perhaps if it's a transfer, it's just going to be over the top, and it'll actually mask the the bumps in it. If it's an embossed, if it's just an embossed section, it might not mask those coatings. Has the coating been put on before or after the logo's been stamped on? All these things just help me during the texturing process, and those are the types of things that are going through my mind when I'm doing it, to make it as accurate as possible. Sounds cheesy, but all these assets that you build for games, they've all got a story, and the more you can sort of put yourself in a mindset of how this object's being created, what it does, and how it's used, the more realistic and believable you get the asset. And sometimes it's a subtle difference, but it does make all the difference and sits that object in the world that it's in, rather than looking like it stands out. Adding in a little bit of an emboss on it as well. Adding a small drop shadow with no distance setting, so I can create a little bit more depth in it, and have it almost look like it's properly inset into the metal. Reducing the saturation a little bit because it was too strong, and giving it a little bit of a blur, just to sort of set it alongside everything else that's there. And I can't really overstate how important it is to keep everything on layers in this. It's not a painting where you're just trying to keep everything on one layer to keep a painterly feel to it and to learn. You're really trying to maximize your efficiency, the ability to deal with critique and direction changes. So if this knife wants to have a clean version, where you start out with a clean version and perhaps per level it gets dirtier and dirtier, for example, it's good to keep all these things on layers so we can export different versions of the texture, and art directors can come and say, well, that those scratches are way too much, so you want to keep those scratches on a layer. The other benefit of keeping the scratches and dirt on layers is that you can remove them from the spec map just by hiding them in the diffuse layer. So when you're calculating, putting your spec on top, you can do a selection mask for the scratches and then make them completely white or completely black in your spec map. And you couldn't do that really if you were just if everything was baked down onto one layer. It sounds simple and common sense, but I've come across quite a few textures which have been accidentally baked down when Photoshop closes, or that you've duplicated it, baked everything down, and then continued to work. Well, usually in those cases it's better to just start again, because it doesn't take an awful amount of time out of your day to start again, and it really is beneficial to have everything set out on layers when working with texturing for games. So I'm painting the right side of the knife differently to the left, separately, just to get that extra variation there, because this is a weapon that if it was for first person view, you can imagine him holding it out in front of him, and it waving it back and forward, so you'd see both sides of the knife at all times. There's no benefit to us mirroring the texture here. We've already set out the UVs for that, so we may as well make use of them. So that's it for the first half of part 5. I'll see you in part 5B, where we'll finish up the texturing and create our spec maps and norm maps.